In today's show, we're talking NBA draft with Chuck from Chucking Darts, Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_Beeble, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We're free and we're available on all platforms. Chuck's going to be here in a second and we're going to be going through guys like Malaki Branham, Gabriele Procida, Ochai Agbaji, Ismael Kamagate, Walker Kessler, and Christian Braun. Well, not guys like those actual guys. That's who we're going to be covering. And tomorrow there is a bonus episode. We're going to be covering another 6 prospects, including Chet Holmgren and Johnny Davis in that show tomorrow. But without further, and I hate when people say without further ado, no, without further ado, let's bring in Chuck. Warnie, what do you think?
Let's get it on, Gilly.
All right, so here he is. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Josh. Very privileged and happy to be here. How are you?
I'm good. Nice early Friday morning here as I'm recording this. We're ready to dig into NBA draft prospects. We're about 7 days, almost exactly, away from the NBA draft. And with all these people we have on talking about the draft, the things that we asked straight off is, who is a prospect that you are higher on than the consensus? And you're throwing me a name that someone's already told me that they're higher on the consensus, so maybe this consensus should move up. That's Gabriele Procida, the 6'7" wing from Bologna.
Yes, sir. I am higher on him. I guess consensus probably has him as a stash candidate, maybe in the second round or something like that. And in the draft cycle, that's due in large part to just not having a lot of hype and narrative around you coming into the season, and then you throw in the fact that he's overseas, and that's how it's going to go. But Procida's theory is that he is athletic enough to legitimately defend in the NBA. There's not going to have to be a waiting period for him. He's still on the right side of the age curve because he's only 20, but in his league, he would have lots of flash plays. He only started 7 games this year and averaged, I think, like 19 minutes a game. And it was a pro team, so it's the whole, they're only going to play guys who help them, win. And so he wasn't the best player on his team, so to speak. But he was athletic enough to really impact the game on both ends. And in the draft, after about pick, really once you get outside the lottery, those are the guys that should be right there. And that's where I have him. I have him somewhere between, 15 and 25.
Yeah, so he's sitting, like, in a lot of places in the 40s in mock drafts. A guy that shot, 38% from 3, attempted over 50% of his shots from deep as well. So it was a pretty good diet of 3-pointers, gets to the line quite a bit. These are all really strong indicators. A pretty solid steal rate as well, despite the low minutes. He averaged 1.6 steals per 36 minutes. That's a good indicator. Not a high usage player by any means, but that's what happens when you're playing over in the professional leagues in Europe. It is hard to get those sort of numbers. And Procida's shooting numbers, we assume 52% shooting from the field is great, 38 from 3 is great. Is that going to be the major strength that he brings, or is that a little bit, European white guy stereotypical, hey, you must be a shooter?
I don't know, man. I don't know if we can cover that in 2 minutes. But look, he's not going to be what, draft Nick's term, a primary creator or anything like that. He's going to be a role player in the NBA, which means that in order to stay on the floor, he's going to have to shoot. Will that be the best part of his game? Probably of his offensive game, that and finishing at the rim. But what really attracts me to him is his defense and his athleticism. Because there are some prospects in this draft that can be very athletic, for example, like jumping off of 2 feet. but they struggle jumping off of 1 foot. A guy who's, I think, ranked a little bit higher than Procida for most people is Dalen Terry, very sort of smart jumbo guard from Arizona. That's a problem that he has. And the reason he only scores 9 points a game is that when he gets into the lane, he can't really elevate and finish through or around anyone. Procida is not that way. And the Arizona player that he more resembles, in my opinion, is Benedict Mathurin. Because Mathurin, like Procida, his theory revolves around his ability to shoot, and Mathurin is probably a bit of a better shooting prospect than Procida is, and his ability to really finish. It's, shooting and athleticism intertwined. Where Procida is a better prospect than Mathurin, in my opinion, is on that defensive end, because he has very good instincts, and however he has been coached for that team or coming up in Italy, he's very fundamentally sound and rotationally sound in closing out shooters, staying with them on drives, not leaving his teammates out to dry with the way that he, intelligently gambles, I'll say. And the flashes are just everywhere, man. They're there in creating sort of the deflections that Mathurin struggles to. Mathurin is sort of an average defender in spite of his really good athleticism. Procida makes his athleticism really play. And that's why I think that he's a very interesting prospect second half of the first round.
How do you compare him with his fellow countryman, Matteo Spaniolo?
Ooh, Spaniolo, I would be talking out of pocket. I have not gone all the way deep in on Spaniolo yet. Procida popped to me because of that athletic tape. Spaniolo is probably something I should say, that I need to really loop in on this last week.
I would suggest that you go and have a look at Spaniolo, because I'm pretty interested in him as a player as well, and I've got those guys relatively close to each other. So maybe that's going to be some homework for you, Chuck. Go and have a look at Matteo Spaniolo. Before we get onto the next prospect, I've got to tell you guys about BetOnline.net, your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. All the latest sports developments, news and odds, including the NBA Finals, which might finish today. The Celtics are 3.5-point favorites in Game 6, but who knows what that means. We've got the NHL Stanley Cup Finals between the Avalanche and the Tampa Bay Lightning, Major League Baseball, the latest fighting news from the MMA, UFC, and boxing. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right. At this point in the show, we talk about players who you are lower on than consensus. And when I did my first mock draft a few weeks ago, I didn't have this guy in the first round. And a lot of people were like, what are you doing? This guy is a first-round player. He has to be there. And some people are very high on this guy, even talking maybe lottery. And that is Ochai Agbaji, the 22-year-old guard, 6'6", from Kansas, who showed heaps of improvement throughout his college career. I am, Chuck, and maybe you have the same thought process here, I am always highly skeptical of players who really start to blow up and become big-time draft prospects when they're 3 or 4 years older than the guys are going up against in college. And I know that Agbaji is a hard worker, great leadership, fantastic intangibles, and showed significant improvement. But the fact that that significant improvement came when he had that advantage over the guys that he was going up against gives me a little bit of pause on that level, much like Jimmer Fredette, Doug McDermott, even like a Buddy Hield who really only blew up when he was 29 years old or whatever he was as a senior. So, okay, so you're down on Agbaji. Is it for similar reasons to that, or what's your overall take here?
Similar, but not the exact same. I think that it is possible to pop, so to speak, in your junior or senior year and ride that into the NBA. I think as long as in those years you are truly dominating your competition, like no doubt physically overwhelming and dominating your competition, then it's okay. I mean, Keegan Murray is turning 22 and this was his breakout year, but you can see the difference in how Keegan dictates an entire game, especially on offense, though Keegan is a two-way player. With Agbaji, my concern is that he doesn't do that. I mean, he is still largely an off-ball specialist kind of player for Kansas. And if you even compare him to someone like Buddy Hield, who I think would be a very optimistic outcome for him, when Buddy was at Oklahoma, he like got up so many threes his senior year, and his scoring was even more consistent than Ochai's was, I guess, in the first half of the year. But he was also notably a better free throw shooter. So, Ochai, I can't remember this year if he ended up getting to 75% from the line or not.
74.
But 74. So that was his highest free throw percentage his whole college career. And for someone whose theory is, I'm going to be a shooter, that's why you draft me, you would want that touch to be a little bit better. And as a senior, the part of the age curve that really concerns me is that he hasn't added anything really meaningful to his game to round it out. Rebounds and assists have stayed stagnant and low. His defensive stats, again, have sort of not matched the athletic profile that I think that he enjoys as a prospect. And if you're at Kansas, who knows how to develop that sort of stuff, and you haven't really met the reputation that I think a lottery pick should have as a senior, that's why I'm lower on him.
You're right about all those things. Assist rate is putrid. It's very low. And an assist to turnover ratio of 0.8 it's bad. 0.6 blocks. Okay, he's a guard, but 0.9 steals. Like that sort of low steal rate in 35 minutes a game is definitely concerning. 1.6 assists. Like he's almost doing the Ryan Anderson here and having less than 2.5 combined assists, steals, and blocks. They are not good numbers to put together. And yes, he did shoot 41% from three, but as you mentioned, the free throw percentage at 74 is the best that he's had across 4 years in college, which is again somewhat of a red flag. And the question I'll always ask is if the shot doesn't go in, if it doesn't go in at this level in the NBA, what are you doing? What are you bringing? What are you hanging your hat on? Can you create? Can you run pick and roll? Can you defend? Can you help? Can you rebound? Can you do any of that? Or is it like the shot has to go in and I have to get a lot of them to provide any level of value? And I'm a little bit there with him at the moment. It tied in with like, hey, you really only blew up when you were 3-4 years older than everybody else you're going up against. And that gives me that red flag. And I have moved him into my first round of my latest mock, but I'm not feeling particularly comfortable with it at the moment.
Yeah, I think this year, the reason why I think I have him early third, I have him right around the same spot. I think I technically have him in the 30s, but it would be one thing if he had this profile and he were 6'7", 6'8", but of course, with the way the NBA is going, the threshold for the height at which you really need to have guard skills is just going to get taller and taller and taller and taller. And Ochai is a bouncy athlete, but he's 6'5", and that's about what he is. And so it's restating the same thing a little bit, but in this particular class, I don't know what you think of Jake LaRavia, for example, or Jabari Walker, or Patrick Baldwin Jr., but there are guys who are 6'8", 6'9", who have these sort of questions, and they're a little bit younger. And they present, I think, a bit more attractive profile than someone like Ochai, because at least they have the size.
I had LaRavia and Agbaji next to each other in my last mock, and I will be having Jake ahead of him in the next one. I'm pretty confident of doing that. One last question on Ochai is, I'm going to preempt the comments that people are going to leave on this show, and they say, well, Desmond Bane, as an older player who was picked at the end of the first round, and look at him now. Why can't Agbaji be Desmond Bane?
Because Desmond Bane ran point for TCU. I mean, he ran their entire offense, I think, as a junior and as a senior. And I loved Bane. But if you were to compare their assist percentages, it would be much different. Bane's steal percentage, I think, was over 2 for 3 or 4 years. His free throw shooting was much more consistent. And as good as Agbaji was this year, shooting 41% on a bunch of volume, Bane was at like 42%, 43% every single year, showed that he can do it off the dribble, that he could do it off movement, heading either to his left or to his right. Agbaji's a good shooter. Bane's a great shooter. And Bane also had an athletic, really a physical profile that was very unique. Bane's not 6'8", but there was not a guy in that draft pound for pound who was stronger than Desmond Bane. And that I had confidence that was going to manifest itself in positive ways, and it did. And Agbaji, again, no slouch. And everything you said at the top about his intangibles, very good kid, could catch on as like maybe a 5th starter, but more likely a 6th, 7th guy. And that's cool, and that's a good career. And to some people, that's worth the 18th pick. But in terms of expending draft capital, I would rather try to take a swing on someone who has a bit of a higher ceiling, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's generally my approach as well when looking at these guys. But it's not to say I like Desmond Bain quite a bit as well. And I think I had him around that 19-20 mark in that draft as well. And obviously he's even outperformed that despite him going at pick number 30. Let's go to another international player now, and we're looking at the centre from Paris, 21 years of age, 6'11", Ismael Kamagate, who is in that sort of group of centres outside of those top couple, if you don't include Chet, like you got Duran and Williams. And then there's a bunch of these guys. I'm going to talk about another one here today. This is Walker Kessler, there's Christian Koloko, and there's Ismael Kamagate, who I've had sort of in and out of the first round. He played 27 minutes a night for Paris last season, averaged 11 and 6. He had really good 64% from the field. Not the greatest rebounder, but some good shot blocking numbers. Just a guy that feels like one of those players that we talk about in the NBA. There's always a bunch of 22-minute, 24-minute a night centers who you might not feel comfortable closing games with, but can go out there and just be an interesting prospect. And the name I'll always throw out there for these sort of players is someone like Clint Capella, like a rim-running, rim-protecting big man who has significant limitations. And if you end up getting to Clint Capella, that's a really big success. So where are you with Kamagate? How do you place him, say, in comparison to Duran and Williams? Is he the next center off the board? Is that worth even a first-round pick, though?
You and I seem to agree on a lot of these guys. I've also had him in and out of the first round. Right now I have him lower 20s, like closer to the teens, somewhere 20 to 24. And comparing him, to Duran and Williams, I have him in between those two. I'm very high on Jalen Duran at the moment, and so we'll just put that to the side. But Williams is going to be a one coverage big, more or less. Maybe he'll be able to hedge and recover a little bit and play at the level of the screen a little bit. But he is most comfortable and most at home around the basket. And Kamagate at least presents the potential a bit more that he'll be able to switch. And there's been times where he's looked really good doing it because he's very, very light on his feet. And he's lighter on his feet than probably either Duran or Williams, though Duran obviously he's 18 years old, so who knows. But there have been times where he's gotten blown by veteran guards in that pro league. So it's not as though he's a savant at it. It's more that he has the tools, and physically he is affecting games enough to where you could see him in a rotation next year and then see where everything else goes. What do you think of his shooting touch, Kamagate's?
I'm not ruling it out. I'd say that if you're going to play the odds, you would say he's never going to be a great shooter or probably even an above average shooter, but it's not somewhere where I'm just going to rule it out completely. I think there is something there a little bit. The free throw percentage isn't fantastic, but I do think that he's got more range than, say, like if we're going to say the bottom of range for centers is Mitchell Robinson, like who just doesn't even put his arms up to shoot outside of the paint. I think Kamagate's got more than that, but he's not going to be Brook Lopez.
Yeah, and certainly, yeah. The centers who can really shoot show you they can really shoot very, very early. But I don't know. Like, I don't think he'll ever be a high volume guy, but in the same way that, you said maybe not necessarily closing games 20 to 25 minutes. I think that he could be someone who is very productive because he might take 3 threes and, hit one of them and allow you to at least present the appearance of playing 5 out a little bit, especially with his movement skills. A player that I don't know that I would really go all in on comparing him to is someone like Maxi Kleber on the Mavs, whose primary skill is also in blocking shots. Kamagate, by the way, was Defensive Player of the Year in that league, so he really was very good at what he did. Kleber also can switch in a pinch, though the Warriors series sort of exposed those limitations. But as someone who was a 25 plus minute center on a conference finals team, I mean, that is returning first round value for Kleber. And that's not how he made his way to the NBA, but that is sort of the model that I think Kamagate might be able to follow. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can see that. he's a very interesting prospect because there's all these sort of guys around this area, like him and Koloko around this area as well. We go, maybe there's a little bit of shooting that can happen in this area, and if it does, it changes so much about them. But I wouldn't want to invest a top 15 pick in hoping that happens. But there is that chance that it happens. I'm pretty interested in him. I was interested in him, dropped off a little bit there, but to me, unless you're this really sort of game-changing type of center, I don't really want to take you in the top 20, and I'm feeling a little bit iffy about having Mark Williams in that just for that particular reason. But in that 20 zone, like getting someone like that works pretty well to me. And that takes us on to the next center, who is a guy that when people are talking fantasy and looking for stats and projections and dynasties, they're going to look at this guy's numbers and go, holy shit, Walker Kessler, like these numbers are crazy, and they're going to overreach for him because if he plays 30 minutes a night, this is a top 30 fantasy sort of a player because the numbers are actually insane that what he put up last year. 4.6 blocks in under 26 minutes is a crazy number. 8 boards. He hit 61% of his shots from the field. He did that with solid enough, only 19% usage. It wasn't like just getting fed. Like he's 11 points, 8 rebounds, 4.6 blocks, over a steal. He attempted threes. They didn't really go in, but 19% attempt rate. They only hit them at 20%, but he's showing that he's willing to take them. Defensively, they're just some really huge numbers. Now, the question is, Chuck, with Kessler, because all these numbers are great, and we think that he will. If he plays minutes, he will block shots. I don't think we've got any debate about that. But can he stay on the floor? Can he cope in a pick and roll? Can he get switched and not get burnt completely? Is he just a product of, I am bigger and going to block everything in college, but that's not going to work in the NBA? Or is there hope that this is going to happen for him?
I think there's certainly hope. I mean, any team that is taking him has to understand what he's good at and where he thrives. So it would ideally be in a drop scheme. Now, I actually think that I wouldn't call him switchable necessarily, but he would close out on shooters. They would blow by him, and he'd be able to recover. Like, he does have some nimbleness to him, and his timing on his recoveries and on his shot blocks is exquisite. Like, saying that, presenting the argument of, is he just this really big guy blocking everything? Well, really big guys who block everything don't block everything as much as Walker Kessler does. He
had 2 triple doubles last season with blocks. Yeah. Like that's actually crazy. And another one where he had missed it by 1 block. Like he had a 9 block game, a 12 block game, an 11 block game. And that's not even counting the 5s and 6s and 7s and 8s. They were insane numbers.
And in the last 15 years, there have been 4 freshmen and sophomores, high major college basketball, who've had a block rate of 12 and a steal rate of 2. That's another thing that's underrated about Walker is his hands are very sort of intelligent. It's Walker Kessler, Nerlens Noel, Anthony Davis, and Isaiah Jackson, who got drafted last year. Now, that's a block rate of at least 12. Anthony Davis has the second highest block rate of this crew at just under 14, and Walker has one of almost 19. That lets you know what sort of an outlier we're dealing with here in terms of how good he is at blocking shots. So when you compare him to like other bigs who've come through and been sort of ineffective, just, like you can, and maybe Walker won't be like a star, but understand that you're not comparing apples to apples. Walker is historically unique with how well he's been blocking shots.
I don't know if you've seen this game, but looking through his box score numbers here, I do want to go and watch this game, and whether it's accessible, I don't know. But on December 4th against Yale, he played only 8 minutes. He didn't have any fouls, and he blocked 4 shots. He didn't score. He missed both of his field goals. He ended up with a line of 0-2-1 with 4 blocks in 8 minutes. Now it doesn't feel realistic for him to. Why did he only play 8 minutes? I don't know. Did he get hurt? I'm not sure. How did he block 4 shots in 8 minutes and not score at all? It is one of the strangest lines that I have seen, and that's including a bloke that said, again, 2 triple doubles with blocks only. So he's a guy that's really interesting, and if it hits, the fantasy value of that is going to be absolutely through the roof. But let's round out the show with a couple of smaller players now, a couple of guards, and let's go to Kansas. We talked about his teammate already in Ochai Agbaji. We're going to go with Christian Braun, 6'7", 21-year-old guard who played 34 minutes a night. He averaged 14 points, shot 39% from 3, decent volume there. 3 assists a game, a steal a game, like just sort of solid enough numbers that if it works out. The size profile is there. 6'7" wing, which is what the NBA wants. Now, unfortunately, he's got a negative wingspan, which is always going to be something that has an issue with NBA teams, and a pretty low-ish steal rate. But Braun, to me, just feels like one of those guys that you take end of the first, early second, in that range that, a few years ago where Dylan Brooks was taking. You just take flyers on these guards, wings, who can hit some threes maybe and handle the ball a little bit, because if it works out, it can be really valuable.
Exactly, yeah. And Braun, I actually think it's pronounced Brown, even though like everything in your brain is telling you to say Braun. I've made this mistake, so don't throw it. That's it's a similar pitch to Procida, a similar pitch where it's shooting and defense. Now, I have Procida above Braun because he has a higher release. He has pure mechanics. And though Brown's three goes in and he has a history of shooting it pretty well, his release is low, and he has displayed sometimes a hesitance to let it go. In fact, I think in the Final Four game against Villanova, there was down the stretch, there were like 3 or 4 possessions where he would just not pull the trigger. And then he had to at the end of the shot clock. And then he hit it, and then he started talking shit to everyone, because that's what, part of his MO is. One thing that's very underrated about Christian is how good a passer he is, especially attacking closeouts. Among all of these little wings, and this draft has a million wing bets to make, there are not 3 that are better at really passing on the move than Christian Braun. So I think if he's going to stick, that would be a part of his game that I feel like really shines in the NBA, especially in the right offense.
He's interesting, and you're right. There's just so many of these guys. Even basically like pick 10 or 11 onwards. It's just guards and wings and guard, which is valuable in the NBA. But how to differentiate them is really tough. And this other guy, the last guy we're going to talk about, I don't know why I left him until last, because he's really interesting to me and a player that I think is getting underrated in some spots, and that is Malaki Branham. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's not Malaki Branham or something stupid like that.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I'm so sorry.
That's all right, mate. Like I strive to try and get things correct, and it's annoying that I got that one wrong, and it's annoying that he pronounced his name wrong, but that's all right. He can choose to pronounce his name whatever he likes. Malaki Branham, 19 years over age, 6'6" guard from Ohio State. Seen him mocked in the 20s, which just doesn't feel right to me. He is I've got that prototypical size, +4 wingspan, shot 42% from 3, tough shot maker, true shooting was 60%, hit his free throws at a really high rate. A lot to like about what that can bring, and that level of tough shot making, and also high 3-point percentage. And if he just takes some of his long twos and pushes them into threes, you're talking about a really valuable wing/forward prospect who can hit these shots, get to the line and convert his free throws, and be a really valuable scoring option. Why is he pushing down into the 20s? Is it like he's just turned 19, so he's super young, and I don't get it. I don't get why he's pushed down so far.
Wasn't a huge high school recruit. I think he was between maybe 30 and 40 as a high school
34
recruit.
on ESPN's list.
And if you compare him to AJ Griffin, who was a huge high school recruit, those rankings do follow you, and they can prop you up. I don't think that objectively Griffin had a better overall season than Branham did, because Branham by the end of the year was his offense's initiator for Ohio State. And he averaged something like 19 or 20 points in his last 15 games. I mean, he was getting it like clockwork, because the way that he operates is to usually use a pick, but get his shoulder past a defender. Doesn't have the craziest first step, which might contribute to his ranking, but he rises up really quickly and has just a deadly pull-up jumper. And the theory of both guys is similar in terms of shooting being their main skill. But you see AJ, mocked anywhere 5 to 11 or 12. Branham is not 15 spots worse. And so that I agree with you that he is underrated. Right now, I think he's anywhere from 10 to 15 on my board.
The wingspan, the size, the position, the shooting, the age, all of this, defensively, I think he can be really good as well. To me, he's if not a lottery guy, he's pretty close to it. And him falling past 15 or 16 wouldn't make a ton of sense to me. I've had him up as high as 11 or up as high as 10 even. I really, really like him, and I can see him having a better career than someone like Benedict Mathurin, or, I'm significantly higher on Brandon than I am with Johnny Davis, who we're going to talk about in the show that's coming out tomorrow as well. So I'm really intrigued to see where he ends up and if it is the right situation, but I'm glad I'm not completely off base with having some high hopes for what Branham can deliver. Is really a really intriguing prospect. It's going to take some things to work in his favour for him to work out to be a very good NBA player, but the building blocks are there in place for me for him to become quite useful, and the team that gets him might end up being one of those ones. How did he slip to 19? How did he slip to 25? Which we have every single year in the draft, and people always look at mock drafts and they look at this and go, how can you have this guy here and how's this guy this high? When you go look back at a year later, you go, this guy was 15 spots too high or 20 spots too low. Happens every year. You just don't know which one of those guys it's going to be. And Branham, to me, is one of those guys that I think we might look back on and go, wonder how he slipped as far as he did. Chuck, thank you for coming on the show and chatting with me about the NBA draft. Tell everybody where they can find all of your other stuff and the shows that you've got going over on your podcast.
It is the Chucking Darts NBA and Draft podcast. It's wherever you get podcasts. My handle's right there on the screen. It's at Chucking Darts. But that's where I release them. Some folks are very nice to retweet my episodes, but that it is a real sort of, I don't know if it's quite a groundswell. I don't know what's less than a groundswell, but I do have a community that helps put my stuff out there. So if you follow me, you'll see my episodes. And Josh, thank you so much. This was a blast. You're one of the best to do it.
Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate that. Now, if you want to be part of Chuck's groundswell, go and check out his episodes as well. Go check out his show. Go retweet it. Get it out to more people. The more information that's out there, the more differing opinions, it gives you better ways of understanding what's going on in the NBA and in the draft world. And Chuck is putting out some fantastic content, so go and check him out. Chuck, thanks for coming on the show, and I'm sure we'll have you back on.
All right. Thank you very much, sir.
And that'll do it for today's show. Don't forget to follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. Don't forget, new show coming tomorrow on YouTube. Comment, thumb it up. You know what to do, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.